No problem. Thank you for having me. I do want to thank everyone. This is my fourth year, I think third or fourth year, being able to talk with you guys. So thank you again for inviting us to talk a little bit on an area of overlap between fires and air quality. Ryan told me that a couple of people had to back out of speaking. So he said I could speak as long as possible. So I'll be talking with you for the next 2 hours about air quality issues. Go ahead and let everybody know you're going to be a little late. I'm just kidding. The first hour is college football. The second hour we'll do my presentation, just so we can delineate. But I do appreciate you having me. I do want to say for the gentleman from Georgia that I, as a Florida State graduate, are very thankful for your team's efforts last Saturday, as well as to the chagrin of my entire family who are Auburn grads. I'm very thankful for Alabama's contribution as well last Saturday. My chemical engineering husband and daughter, who's currently living her best life at Auburn, would disagree, but I am very thankful, and college football is always relevant, always relevant. So let me go ahead and get started. Before I ask Ryan to forward the slides, I did want to say that every time I listen to one of these conferences that you guys have put on, I learn so much. The first year, I had no idea that fuel meant something different, so I had to go find that. Now I found out that litter means something different, and really I enjoy so much these conversations and learning new things about fire. We've been able to be at the couple of fire summits at the Jones Center in Southwest Georgia, and we've really enjoyed our time there. And like I said, I love fire. I think I became addicted to it when I was at one of those summits at the Jones Center. But one of the things that I wanted to also say before we got started is that I liked what Mr. Sharp had to say. We really just want to talk to you today about awareness. We're providing this information to make people aware. There is a carryover between fires and ecosystem. We've seen it carry over between species. And this is just another area where fire can carry over. And in this case, it happens to be in air quality. So if you'll go ahead and start the next slide, please, Ryan. So we issue air quality forecasts for 4 areas of our state: Huntsville, Decatur, the Birmingham area, Columbus, Phenix City with the state of Georgia, and then the Mobile area, Mobile and Baldwin County. And so one of the things that we do is we have monitors that obviously read the air, and it provides us with an opportunity to help educate what the forecast will be for the next day. And so on a couple of days I'm going to discuss now, we happen to have exceedances of our standard. That means we exceeded what EPA considers healthy for individuals. And so on this map, we'll start off with March 8th of this year. And this is in all 3 of these instances, are in the Phenix City, Columbus area. And so the standard is set at 35 micrograms per cubic meter. And as you can see, during this month, we had several days that exceeded that standard. And then if you look at the dotted line, that is the proposed standard, well, a potentially proposed standard. EPA is currently relooking at the PM2.5 standards to determine if they need to be dropped. And so that map simply shows you that during this March period of about, looks like 6 or 7 days, we had 3 exceedances of the PM2.5 standard. Next slide, please. This is just a graph that shows you what happened during the 8th. Phenix City had an exceedance of 52 micrograms, and Columbus had an exceedance of 42. Again, the standard is 35 micrograms in a 24-hour period. And as you can see on the bottom, it shows you when the levels got big. It looks like it started about 3 in the afternoon. We started seeing higher levels, and we hit a max of 123 micrograms per cubic meter on an hourly basis. Next slide, please. So you probably are aware of what surface maps are. It's simply showing you that we had high pressure along the Appalachian Trail, along the Great Smoky Mountains up into the Mid-Atlantic states. And so your winds under high pressure tend to be calm or very light. And so what it says is there's not a lot of mixing, and that means those plumes stay together, whether they're coming out of the tailpipe of your car, out of a power plant or another industrial process, or from a fire. Next slide, please. And then when we meteorologists talk, we always like to talk about what's happening at the surface, and we like to talk what's happening aloft. And so this simply shows you that there is, again, we're under a ridge, and so there's sinking air, which means that we're going to have inversions, and we'll talk about that in just a second. Next slide, please. You may be aware of what this is. This is called a sounding. That's where when you see those weather balloons that are released 2 times a day, 7 a.m. and 7 p.m. It gives us an idea of what's going on in the upper atmosphere and at the ground. And right here, what's circled is a radiation inversion. Inversions are simply caps on the air. It's like putting a bowl over steaming water or something. You're trapping the air below the inversion. There's very little mixing, and so things tend to accumulate. So we see that on the morning of the 8th, we had a very large radiational inversion going on. Next slide, please. Then again, we also see at 7 o'clock, another weather balloon is released, and we can see that there's a small subsidence inversion. The difference between a subsidence inversion and a radiational inversion is generally just height. Subsidence inversions occur higher in the atmosphere. These are very typical, typically occur with clear days, light winds, very light winds, clear, very high clouds, if any clouds. So what we're noticing here is that there's a cap on the atmosphere from the morning till night. Next, please. This is a Windrose. You've all seen one, I'm sure. And the most important thing for me to show you here is 2 things. Number one, in the middle, it says 66.7% of the time the winds are calm. We have a lot of stable areas here in the South, a lot of times of the year where the air is extremely stable. And so 66% of the time, the airflow is undetectable from a weather service standpoint. And then at the very bottom, you'll see that the average speed when there was wind was 1.7 miles per hour, which means nothing. And so we don't have any movement, so we don't have any way to disperse whatever pollution is in the atmosphere. Next, please. These are our METAR. Those are just code for observations from the Weather Service. And you can see under abbreviation, we have haze, and FU means smoke. So we know that we had smoke and low visibilities. Our visibility dropped from 10 miles, statutory miles, to at some point 3. So we know that there's haze around. Everything is pointing us to a good explanation. We can ID who or what is causing these hive levels. Next, please. Luckily for us, Fort Benning did put out a prescribed burn announcement, and it told us that they were going to begin burns on March 8th, and you know, they indicated where they thought the wind flow was. This is extremely important when I talk to you later on about having these fires thrown out as exceptional events. And so we do have documentation that a burn was being planned and executed. Next, please. So this is a smoke map. You've probably seen these as well. The general gray in the background is just general smoke that can't be identified by one plume, but you do have, obviously, the darker plumes are identifiable. That means they're big enough fires that they can trace the plume. And clearly you can see from where Fort Benning is to the monitor in both Phenix City as well as Columbus, you can see that we had really, really high values. And I think during this time, the value was 95 micrograms at that monitor. Next, please. And then the last thing I want to tell you about is we run a model, you may run it as well, called high split. All we're doing is we're backing the parcel of air up in time. So we back it up 48 hours, sometimes it's 12 hours, 24. This one's a 24-hour backup in time. And clearly it goes at all levels. I think we did 10, 100, and 250 at all levels. It's very uniform in height, and it's coming from the Fort Benning area. Next, please. I'm going to run through the rest of these pretty quickly as well. This is the exceedance on the 13th of March. at both the, I'm sorry, the 13th would be just the Phenix City monitor. Next, please. Again, you can see that the concentrations varied a little bit more throughout the day, higher a little bit earlier on, but our highest concentration was 68 micrograms, and it occurred at the last hour of the day, but it was just over the standard of 35 micrograms. Next, please. Again, let's look at our surface map. A lot of times what you'll see when you see really stable air is a stationary front. Sometimes there's moisture. When there's moisture, you get storms that kick up and help clean the air out, and sometimes not. And if you'll notice, right off to the looks like South Carolina, Georgia border, there's a trough there. Probably that trough, looking at the isobars, probably the trough extended down into Alabama. Next, please. Again, we're under a ridge, and you can see our winds are blowing from the east to the west. There are some fairly high wind barbs aloft, but not at the surface. Next, please. Again, I told you about inversions. We see these inversions again, and those again work as caps. They cap the lower atmosphere, and they don't allow those pollutants to easily mix out. Next, please. You notice the weather balloon that was lifted also showed a very large inversion again at the 7 p.m. hour. Here's our Windrose again. Important to note, 65% of the time it was calm. And even when it was calm, you might have had an hour or so where you did have some significant winds, but the average speed was 1.8 miles per hour. You're just not dispersing your plumes. Again, smoke was detected the entire day, which is pretty rare to see the observations every hour. Now, what's interesting is sometimes the visibility is 10 miles per hour. And what that means is that the smoke is very fine. It's very fine. It's being observed, but it's not necessarily affecting your visibility. Next, please. All right, and this time it's a little different. This time we have a general slug of air that is just emanating from who knows where. These are little red triangles, represent all the fires that were occurring. And again, it looks like over in Albany, you had an 83.6, which is above the standard. Of course, well, it may be. That hour was definitely above the standard, but we had a 55 in Phenix City. I keep wanting to say Panama City, Phenix City, our state, not theirs. Okay, next, please. Again, we backed the wind trajectory out. One thing that's really important to notice is when you back something out 12 hours and it doesn't move very far, that's a clear indication that the air is just recirculating. It's moving so slowly, it's just kind of moving around like you're stirring a pot. It's not really going anywhere. It's just kind of a slug of air. Next, please. The last one I'm going to talk about is the very next day. And we, again, we had an exceedance at Phenix City, not so much at Columbus. And again, I want to point out the dotted line is a potential lowering of the standard that EPA may choose to do in the, I think, middle of the next year to address health concerns that have been identified associated with these particles. PM fine is an extremely varied pollutant. It can come from lots of different places, and it requires chemistry. It can be released directly, but most of it is chemically reactive, and it comes from so many places. When we look at ozone as another pollutant that we evaluate here in Alabama, we look at ozone, which fires can contribute to. We look at ozone, it can easily be washed out, but these particles are so suspended and they're so fine that even rain doesn't necessarily clean the air out. So anyway, on this day, we had again another exceedance of the standard. Next, please. One more time, you can see this time it was high pretty early on, which tells you that there was recirculation, and again, it didn't get dispersed out. And so our highest numbers tend to be in the morning, and I think we had a high of 81, and our average across the 24 hours was 44 micrograms. So it may not even be burning on this day. It may be carryover from burning the day before. And again, you did see a small peak, it looks like towards the end of the day, but really it looks like the big slug of the air was in the morning. And again, sometimes when you have a radiational inversion, as soon as the sun starts hitting that and breaks it up, you get free mixing. And so it may not have been that this day by itself was caused, it may be carryover that wasn't able to be quickly dispersed throughout the atmosphere. Next, please. Again, I love maps. I'm a meteorologist. We're geeks that way. And so again, you can see it. We had a stationary front on top of us. Again, which means the front's died. It's just hanging out until something moves it. And so chances are that if there's no available moisture there, it's just dry air and it's just still. Next, please. Last map, last meteorological map, I promise. And again, we're under a ridge again. That air is sinking, so it's pushing down. It's holding kind of like a cap, and it's keeping the lower atmosphere from dispersing. Next, please. I love a sounding. So this is our sounding, again, radiational inversion. That explains why we had those high numbers in the morning until the sun can break that up first thing in the morning, which happens about 9 to 10, that maybe even a little later, depending on how hot it is. It's going to allow those pollutants to just sit around. They're not going anywhere. They're just hanging out. Next, please. And then again, you have a small cap by 7 p.m. But as you could see, it did appear to be the numbers dropping by evening. Again, I can't stress it enough. We had this a lot in Alabama, 65% calm, average wind speed 1.9. And when it was out of when there was a detectable wind speed, it was kind of all over the place. A little bit of a southwest flow, but for the most part, it's pretty random. Again, we had haze and we had smoke, low visibilities during that time. It's obvious, again, those early morning hours, we're seeing it. That's where our highest concentrations were. And then look, about 10 o'clock, like I said, 11 o'clock, you start seeing the visibility improve, and the rest of the day showed a decrease in the concentrations. I know y'all are loving all this meteorology. Again, here's our fire map. Numerous fires, not surprising. It's March. We're aware of that. And so it wasn't a definitive smoke plume per se, but there was smoke in the area. And again, our concentration showed it. Next, please. I don't know why people are banging on the walls here. And then our trajectory, again, you see a little bit of difference now. I want you to notice those lines aren't on top of each other. They're not on top of each other, but they're in the general direction, which means you're getting a little bit of a different wind direction at height. And so again, it's still low, but you are starting to see a little bit of mixing out. So that would explain why the concentrations probably dropped throughout the day. So this is really the most important thing I'd like to leave with you, the most important slide. As we showed, there were several exceedances of the 24-hour standard. The health-based standard were observed, 3 at Phenix City and 1 at Columbus. And all of these can be traced back to either general fires in the area, as well as fires outside of the state. For example, Fort Benning. What's really important about this is, actually, I think it's the next slide. The future outlook is that they are reconsidering these standards. Under the Trump administration, they had made a decision not to change the standards, but under the Biden administration, they have made a decision to reevaluate them. That doesn't mean that they'll be lowered, but the levels that we heard last time would be as low as 9 micrograms on an annual standard and 25 on a 24-hour. So those would become even more important days to try to have removed from the calculation of the standard. Is there one more slide? No. Okay, so let me finish by talking about this, because I thought there was, but there's no telling where it went. We have what's called an exceptional event rule. And in the exceptional event rule, it allows, no, it doesn't seem to be there, Ryan. Thank you. It allows for states to remove data where we can show a couple of criteria have been met. One of them is that it's clearly the only reason that we exceeded was for this reason. Another one is that it's not expected to reoccur. Now you're saying, wait a minute, we burn on a cycle and it could reoccur. But EPA has started to recognize that, and they've actually put out some additional exceptional events information that allows us to take into consideration prescribed burns when removing those days from our calculation. Obviously, when you're in non-attainment, it's not a great idea for anybody. It makes things difficult for new industry to build, it's not a good PR thing. We don't want our Alabamians breathing poor air quality or poor air. But the thing that saves us is a thing called a smoke management plan. A smoke management plan is a plan in place that allows us to, when we have these exceedances, go in and try to mitigate where we can. And if you do not have one of those in place in your state, you cannot remove source days from your exceptional events. And so we've worked really well with John Goff and others to try to make sure we have a smoke management plan. We have one much earlier than a lot of our states. And as a result, when these days happen, and I do say when, because to be honest with you, I'm so sorry. I don't know what's going on here in the background. A lot of sources of pollutants that have traditionally been sources of pollutants have reduced. Power plants have gone to natural gas. Cars have gotten cleaner. And so going into the future, you'll be reevaluating who the biggest contributors are to these air quality issues. And I do want to stress, having worked with fire for several years now, we're not in the business of telling people not to burn. We're in the business of communication so that when these types of things happen, that we can make reasonable assertions to EPA to have that data removed. So I hope that helped a little bit. Maybe you found that interesting. If not, I found the bats really interesting. And so we could talk about them a little bit, but these are case studies where we are able to identify air quality issues associated with fires. And again, there's a mechanism in place for us to fix that. So as long as we stay in good communication with our forestry friends, I think that we have a great relationship to move forward in the future when these situations happen. I hope I didn't talk too long. If you still want to talk college football, I can maybe get Ryan to agree, but otherwise I'll take any questions you may have.
Leigh, thank you. As always, thank you very much. We were glad to have ADEM as a partner on the Prescribed Fire Council, and for speaking for myself as a burner, but I know many others, we're weather nerds as well. And even on days we're not burning, we're sitting there drooling over the maps, wishing we were out there.
Isn't it great? Anyway.
It's wonderful. So Stiver said he canceled his burns for Chambers County on March 13th as the dispersion index was 8 that day.
Yeah. Yep, perfect example. Yeah, and those fire dispersers, those indices are so wonderful. Yeah, I mean, your wind directions can change, your conditions can change, but you know, really paying attention to those and making those choices, I think end up benefiting everybody. It's not always going to be right, but I would say a dispersion index like that, I'm glad you did change.
Yeah.
So.
And Dean Trawick asked, what is driving the long burn ban period in Baldwin and Mobile counties? I could understand a shorter period, but it's extensive. And can you kind of note the difference with the agriculture exemption for forestry that we can burn still?
I can and I can't. So what I can do is I can get you some follow-up from Don Barron, who handles that. But I can speak to the long burn ban. It's the ozone season, and as the standards continue to drop, we continue to have longer periods of time where our monitors are showing high values, and that's why that occurs. We're trying to mitigate as best we can any source of pollution that we can mitigate, and that's why you have the burn bans like that. It's March 1 to November 1, I think, October 31st. So, you know, I know it's difficult. Sometimes I get it. I can't speak to the agriculture as much, agricultural aspect. It's been a long day. But I'll make sure that if that question gets answered, I'll have Don Barron respond with some information about that. There is a difference between silviculture and avicultural versus other burning. Yes, there is.
Yeah, and then what I meant by that was just with the silviculture and the agriculture, we can get an exemption and
Yes.
still pull a burn permit and burn during that time. It's I think trying to stop that trash burning is the big thing.
Exactly, exactly. Or unauthorized burns of any kind, trying to have it. Exactly. Yeah. But again, if you need more information on that, Dawn, I'm sure we'll be glad to provide that as well. But we recognize that it's a long period of time. And there's also exemptions for other things like natural disasters and those types of things. So we try to work as much as we can around that. But we do understand it's difficult and we're sorry. But again, the standards continue to drop and the air continues to get cleaner and cleaner. And so we're chasing a moving target when it was way up here. And then we got air quality and then they dropped it. And then we got air quality down and then they dropped it. So it's kind of a little bit of a moving target. But I am sorry about that. And I'd do something if I could.
It's all good. It was interesting last year after Hurricane Sally. I'm down here in Baldwin County, and some of the municipalities wrote a significant number of tickets to homeowners for burning during the burn ban.
Really?
Just trying to clean up stuff. Yes.
That is odd because, what they generally do, and I don't want to speak outside of my realm because I like to stay in my lane, and meteorology is my main lane. So is that they would have dump sites where you could take that to, and then it would be burned. They just choose not to do that?
Correct. Yeah, they were burning. Yeah. We had a lot of debris, but they were burning in yards and stuff. And
yeah, I figure.
Is what it is.
Yeah, it is what it is. Okay.
But thank you so much, Leigh, for joining us. I don't have any more questions in the chat. I got a bunch of good jobs and great presentations. So thank you.
I like it. You're welcome. Thanks for having me.
Absolutely.